Welcome to the SCR Connections August webinar. Thank you again for joining us. It will be my pleasure today to introduce our speaker, Karen Gutzman, who is the Impact and Evaluation Librarian at Galter Health Sciences Library at Northwestern University. Karen works within the library's Metrics and Impact Core to support individuals and groups in their understanding, assessment, visualization, and reporting of impactful outcomes of research and clinical care efforts. Karen was a presenter at both MLA and ALA annual conferences this year, and we're very fortunate to have her with us. I'm now going to go ahead and hand over moderator privileges to Karen and let her get started. Good morning, Karen.
Hi, and thank you. A special thank you to Sarah Miles and Bethany Livingston and the NNLM South Central region for inviting me to give this talk. So today I'd like to talk to you about impactful partnerships working with faculty to enhance visibility and dissemination of research. As Sarah had mentioned, this is actually a presentation that I originally gave at the American Library Association conference as part of a panel. And I have a DOI link to those slides at our institutional repository called Digital Hub here at Northwestern University, Feinberg School of Medicine, as well as the slides for today are also available there. As we get started here, a little overview of what we're going to cover. I hope to talk to you a little bit about our metrics and impact core services, just give you an overview of the types of things we offer, and then dive into two particular services, the Enhancing the Impact of Your Research class, and then review the Research Impact Assessment consultation that we do. And by doing this, I really hope that you can gain a better understanding of how libraries can provide assistance to faculty with visibility and dissemination and gather some inspiration and ideas. Also, I do want to note that this is really something where there can be a lot of creativity, a lot of ideas coming in, and so if you have ideas and thoughts and things that you would like to add to this, please add them, write them in the chat box, and we can talk about them after the presentation. I really think that there's just so much here for brainstorming and ideas that coming together and kind of doing that together is a really good process or approach to helping with visibility and dissemination. And also, I would be remiss if I didn't mention that visibility and dissemination go hand in hand with research impact, and you'll see that throughout my presentation, and hopefully I can kind of make a clear distinction of those relationships as we go on. Also, if you have questions, feel free to mention them in the chat window. All right. So I work with at Galter Health Sciences Library with the Feinberg School of Medicine, and a couple of a little bit of background information to kind of give you context behind the services that we provide. Feinberg School of Medicine is doing quite a lot of research and has received a lot of funding to do research. In fact, they're up about 72% from 2012 in the money that they have received for doing research in research awards. And so there has been a big push recently on campus to really kind of increase the funding that we have and to expand the research that we're doing. And that actually kind of impacts the types of services then that we would provide our faculty, because we know now that that is something, that they're really working on, and there's a real push and a real increase in that, and we want to be able to help them in that process. As my library director, Christy Holmes, is often saying, we're all just trying to get our work done. And what types of services we provide is how can we actually help people to get their work done. Also, when we're talking about partnerships with faculty, it helps to know the different types of faculty that we work with. So we have about 2,000 full-time faculty, 4,000 overall if we include the health system clinicians. And they come in kind of four different, I guess you could say, flavors. There's the clinician educators, There's the clinical researchers, then there's just our research faculty, and then the last one, which is new to us in the last about 4 years, is the team scientist track. And that is evolving kind of what that means and who's involved in that. So that's been kind of interesting for me to watch and see how that grows. So Galter Health Sciences Library in 2014 created what's called the Metrics and Impact Core. And this core provides advisory services for researchers, groups or departments, individuals on topics related to successful publishing strategies, really all of that kind of managing and tracking of publications or managing and tracking of research, talking about impactful online identity, really helping to measure or assess research impact by discipline, and then also that piece of communicating research impact to audiences. And so you can see dissemination and visibility kind of coming in throughout all of these things that we support our researchers with. One of the interesting things is we chose the word core because that is actually someplace that our researchers know is available to them to give them services. There are core research facilities like the proteomics core where they can go and get services related to what they need. And so we use that language again in our library to kind of be consistent with what the type of language is being used on campus. And I often get the question, especially from people who are working on maybe developing these services at their own institutions, what kind of data sources and tools do you use as part of the core? When I first started here in 2014, we were lucky enough to have access to Scopus, PubMed, and Web of Science. And those are the 3 main tools that I will use when I do analyses or help with tracking. And they all have their kind of strengths or differences. But as we kind of moved on and grew, our services incorporated tools such as essential science indicators and insights. We just got access to insights. We're starting to integrate it into more of the work that we do. And then also we're implementing symplectic elements, and it hasn't been made publicly available to the campus, but it's definitely something that we're continuing to work on, and we really see benefits of using that particular tool, which kind of integrates data from all these different literature databases for individuals, so you have a really complete kind of record of data for your faculty. And then we use various visualization tools. Some of them free, some of them not. Tableau is not, but all the other ones you see listed there besides Excel are freely available. And Microsoft Excel is something I use often. You can do a lot in Microsoft Excel. And so you don't always need the most fancy tools available to you in order to do some of that work. So because we're focusing on faculty today, I wanted to talk about some of the metrics and impact core services that we have specifically for individuals. So these are services that we tailor to the individual. We also have services that are for groups, and those I didn't list here. Some of them are overlapping. They can work with both the individual or the group, but I think it's kind of a good idea to recognize that when you're working with groups of people versus individuals, they have different needs. And so these are the ones that we have for individuals. So we have some classes that are on demand, which is basically saying they're available for people to request on our website. And oftentimes they are requested for lunch and learns or faculty meetings. And so the most basic class is the Enhancing the Impact of Your Research. It's a real umbrella class that includes a lot related to dissemination and visibility and research impact. We also have a class on how to prepare an NIH biosketch. And this one is really interesting because a lot of our faculty have started to kind of work on their tenure and promotion packets and make them similar to what is required for the NIH biosketch. And so we're seeing some overlap there since the new biosketch came out. We also have a class on the NIH relative citation ratio and the eyesight tool, and I'll talk about that in a little bit, but that being kind of a new metric that came out from the NIH and has been of interest to people, and so we just created a class. And sometimes we don't actually give the whole class, we actually just kind of insert slides here and there in other presentations, but we do have the full class available if anybody would be interested in it. And then upcoming, we have a dissemination and outreach overview class that we've just finished. It's actually available for groups now, and we need to make it more available for individuals, so we're kind of working on that. We have a journal selection class, which is to be named. It hopefully won't just have the kind of dull title of journal selection, but that one is upcoming. And then we would like to work with our Office of Faculty Affairs to really create more of a tenure and promotion class for those that are particularly going through that, filling out that information and what we call the critical references form, and kind of showing them tools and resources and ways that they can talk about their research impact on that form. Then we also have several consultations that we do, and granted, I know a lot of times people just get emails and say, hey, can you meet with me and talk about this, or I have a question about this, and they don't always fall neatly into these consultations, but this is kind of for our purposes, we have these kind of 3 areas that everything kind of falls into. We have the research impact consultation, or impact assessment consultation, and then we have a consultation where we actually review someone's biosketch and we give them pointers and tips and we work on the wording of that. Sometimes that happens over email and isn't necessarily in person. We also have a tenure and promotion consultation, which is incredibly and very interesting. That's something we just started. We've done a few of them, and I find it very fascinating just because we get to really hear about a person's work and their career, and it's kind of a really neat place to be providing support. And then the last area is we have some standardized reports related to individuals, simply because we get requests often and we needed to kind of create something as a standard so that we could do these more quickly and more efficiently. And so we have the individual publication summary, and then we have a journal selection review, which has been a kind of a lifesaver at different times to make sure that we can get all of our work done. It's been nice to have those. So today I'm actually going to go through one of our classes, Enhancing the Impact of Your Research, and then one of the consultations and give you an example of a consultation for the Research Impact Assessment consultation. So I'm not actually going to go through the actual class with you. That might be a little too much, but I'm going to give you an overview of what we cover and some ideas and ways that you can make it more customizable to a particular group. So this class is available on demand with customizable options, and oftentimes I customize it based on whoever has requested it. I ask if there's anything in particular they're interested in, and sometimes it takes a few kind of back and forth to really figure out what it is they're hoping to get out of that class, either for an individual or maybe they'll ask us to come and do like a lunch and learn. And so, and we also try to make it very practical. Our slides actually have a little checklist on the side so that as we go through, they can see easily how they could go through this checklist and do these things for themselves. And as you can see, we list a lot of practical strategies that we cover. So the first thing we talk to them about is establishing an online identity, and really here the idea is to get across them. They really want to put their best foot forward and look to see how they're being represented online. We talk to them about using their same author name and affiliation name consistently. It kind of helps to come up with ideas or look at ways that people have used your institution's name and maybe not the best way. Even for Northwestern University, we see lots of strange abbreviations for Feinberg School of Medicine that certainly don't help in information retrieval, particularly in databases that don't use affiliation IDs and that sort of thing. We also talk to them about ORCID. It's really great, I think, when talking about ORCID to first explain that it's an ID and it also has a profile system, and then you can show them examples of people maybe within their faculty group or within their school that have registered for an ORCID ID and kind of what those profiles look like, or have kind of a nice example for them. And then also to show them journals that they might be publishing in that request that authors provide in ORCID ID, just to kind of give them a feel for why this is important and how they might come across it in their field. We also talked to them about corporate authorship or using their study name in a title or abstract, and this really helps with tracking and kind of like finding that group. So if they're part of a group, they can choose, for example, if you have the electronic version of the slides, there's a hyperlink here to the Ocular Hypertension Treatment Study Group. They use OHTS as a corporate author in PubMed, and it's very easy to find all of the work related to that group in one place. And then the Cardia study requested that any authors that use Cardia data use the term Cardia or the full version of it without the acronym in the title or abstract, and that has been, for me, as a person who's tracking the work of the Cardia study, a godsend, really, because I can find not only Cardia documents, but I can find citations to Cardia documents if they've used Cardia in the title. And so that's been incredibly helpful, especially if you're going to like a public health website and you just want to see if the public health group has cited a Cardia document and you are searching their website for it, you can more easily find that information. And then we talked to them about keeping their author profiles up to date, and off to the right you'll see a full list of all of the different kind of author profiles that are available. There's so many more, and just to make sure they're periodically checking those, and you can even talk about how they write their biography or their biographical kind of sketch for that, and you can show them kind of good examples of good profiles, things to look for. The next thing that we talk about is enhancing the discovery of your work. In particular, we talked to them about academic search engine optimization. So these would be for things like PubMed, Web of Science, Scopus, just helping them understand how data is retrieved and kind of like discovered by searchers in those databases. There's actually quite a lot of literature on that, and you can talk to them about optimizing their title, abstract, and keywords. And I know that as librarians, we all have those, like that one abstract that we know should have come up in a search, but it didn't, and so we had to, like, you know, kind of create these really crazy searches to get that abstract in the search results. And so that would be a perfect example to show them of kind of a non-optimized abstract and how it might have been optimized further for searching in these databases so that people can discover that work in the normal ways that they might search for it. So we do that. We provide those examples. And then also we talk to them about controlled vocabularies and using those as kind of places to find keywords, as well as Google Trends to show or learn how people are querying a topic. We briefly touch on publishing strategies, such as publishing in journals indexed in maybe the biomedical literature databases, so PubMed, Scopus, and Web of Science. And just explain why, you know, how PubMed is called by Google and Google Scholar, and that indexing with MESH really increases discoverability, and so it's a great tool. So those are some things that maybe don't always seem very intuitive to them, and so it's kind of helpful to cover them. We talk about increasing the dissemination of their work, and particularly basic strategies for how they might do that. And this is really where a lot of customization comes into play. You could spend probably the entire time with them just talking about publishing strategies and helping them learn about how they might choose a journal, because in traditional scholarly publishing, where we're publishing journal articles, the journal is a huge form of that dissemination for them, right? It's really kind of the thing that's driving their work out there, and so they want to choose a journal that's going to help disseminate that paper in the best ways possible. And so, you know, you've got things like how you might, you know, look to see how long it takes to publish in that journal. You know, are they choosing the best journal for what they need? And then there's these in-person strategies where we really focus on telling them they should take time to participate, present, and share. Never lose that opportunity or an opportunity to do that. And we list some examples, like joining a professional organization or teaching CE courses, serving as reviewers for journals, presenting in journal clubs that might be on campus. If you know of any, you could list them there. And we also give particular tips throughout the presentation, like, hey, maybe you want to consider writing about your research in a trade journal or magazine to reach members of the profession or industry. And then we list some of the trade magazines that are for that particular group and show them how to search for those in Scopus and find more kind of ideas, because they all have different ways, these trade journals and magazines, of soliciting information. Sometimes they have a writer that sometimes they'll take written content from a researcher, and other times they actually have a staff writer that would write that story for them. So this is kind of a nice I think, overview. And then, so we talked about publishing strategies and in-person strategies, but of course there's all these online strategies as well. So you could have them, talk to them about blogs and podcasts or videos, maybe show them some examples in their field of popular blogs, talk to them about multi-author blogs, so if the group of them wanted to get together and write something, or asking them if they want to ever be write a guest post on a popular blog or for a national organization. There's lots of really kind of big blogs out there that people do follow and read, and I guarantee you those bloggers want to go on vacation every once in a while, and so they might actually be okay with having a guest blogger. They can utilize social media such as Twitter, Facebook, and YouTube, and you can talk to them about different tools to do that and to do that efficiently. And I don't have this one listed on there, but there's a tool called Kudos, which is really helpful in kind of bringing together all of their social media profiles and allowing them to push kind of plain language summaries across all of their profiles using Kudos as a kind of a platform for that. Then they talk about using listservs to promote their work. And I think really important here is the idea of a plain language summary for their research. It's not necessarily just dumbing down their research, but it's actually using kind of examples that people will understand, or really thinking about the audience and how the audience might be interested in this. And so I put down two kind of resources that we share with people. One is some really quick tips from the Kudos tool that I mentioned earlier, and the other one is the PRISM toolkit and workshop that has some real practical strategies of how to change wording and things like that to make your research a little more into a plain language form. And then we also discussed the type of content that they could write about on a particular blog or Facebook post or wherever they might be interested in that, or a podcast. They could discuss their research findings. They could talk about questions in their area of research, any burning questions that exist, or they could comment on publications by other authors, congratulating other authors on their work or their breakthroughs. And there's really so much here. In fact, they actually might have some ideas if you kind of open up the floor to brainstorming as well. So there's a lot that you can do with dissemination, kind of starting them off with ideas and then getting them going and talking about how it is that they find information and what they find interesting in the audiences they want to reach. And of course, dissemination, I think, just begs for a conversation about open access. And this can happen in a lot of ways. You can go to the directory of open access journals and show them some of the journals that are open access in their field. Generally, they understand kind of the article processing fees, and they might know about the different models of open access, but they may not know it by the names that we call it by, green and gold and that sort of thing. But they're aware of that, and they're aware of kind of this idea that, you know, what open access generally means, but you can talk to them about how that helps with dissemination, and helping people find their work might increase the use of their work, and how we track the use of the work is through generally citations, but also views and downloads and things like that. We talked to them about Sherpa Romeo, because that seems to be a tool that a lot of people aren't sure of and don't know that it exists, for finding kind of what the open access policies of their publisher are. And so that's a great tool to mention to them, or even show them how it works. It has a very strange name, and I think that may be why they haven't heard of it. And then we talked to them about options for sharing. Of course, we mentioned our institutional repository digital hub, which is a place for the scholarship of Northwestern medicine. But if that doesn't fit for them, we also talk about SlideShare, Figshare, and others. And we really do talk about alternative outputs as well, so not just the peer-reviewed publications, but all of those other things that they're creating as a part of that research process, so protocols, educational materials, presentations, posters, that is actually the Digital Hub and other repositories a really good place to kind of create a collection and kind of get your work out there so it's available and findable and searchable. And then we also, give them a little tip about maybe once you make something open, you have to know that lots of different audiences might find that. And so you might want to put something in your article that appeals to various audiences. So for instance, maybe include a short discussion in your article about how your research could translate to clinical outcomes or technologies to enhance the probability that that article maybe will affect public policy. Maybe there's somebody reading this is trying to figure out some kind of policies, and so you want to kind of make sure that you're talking to that audience as well and not just the research community. Okay, so that was an overview of the Enhancing the Impact of Your Research class that we give. It's a broad, overarching class that can have lots of customizable options for whatever group you're talking about, and you can definitely cover the full time with that, a full hour with faculty. In fact, if you get them talking, if you can kind of get them going with some icebreakers and such, you can generally spend even more than that on that topic. And then the next one is the Research Impact Assessment Consultation that I want to cover with you. And so there's a little bit of background I want to make sure we cover too before we jump into what a consultation might look like. First of all is recognizing that when people come in or ask for have questions about research impact or dissemination and that sort of thing, they have a lot of different motivations for doing that you kind of have to keep in mind, or at least kind of discover from them as you go through this process. Sometimes it's just asking them, and other times it comes out just from what they're talking about. You can kind of start to see what their motivations are. But then maybe they have career motivations. They're going through the tenure promotion process, or funding motivations. Maybe they really are just trying to justify a future funding request, or maybe they want to do some kind of quantifying a return on research investment. Maybe not like an official kind of quantitative sort of thing, but they want to talk about kind of the return on investment that the funder gets for their research. And then they also maybe have some kind of motivations that have to do with their community of research, their collaborators and the people that are in their field. They maybe just want to discover how their research findings are being used. Maybe that is their curiosity, the motivating factor here. Or if they want to actually see more than just how they're being used, maybe they want to see really, really how they're being used. Are they being improved upon, repudiated, extended, corrected, those sorts of things, or confirmed? They want probably to know that their research findings are being properly attributed or credited to them. They maybe want to demonstrate that they had some kind of meaningful outcome, or that there's been some kind of, or discover if there's been some kind of community benefit as a result of their research findings. So there's lots of different motivations, and I couldn't possibly all fit them on one slide, and I'm sure we can think of even more than this, where they might be, why these faculty might be seeking assistance on research impact. Today's scenario is very broad, so the one I'm going to cover today is a researcher that comes in or emails and says, I'm early in my career, so I'm an early career researcher, I'm in a narrow research field, how do I describe my impact? That's how it starts. And so just keep that in mind, because I have a couple more background slides I want to cover with you before we get into that scenario. So first off is just kind of to orient us to this idea of impact, right? Because I think that it gets a little confusing because people use that word in a lot of ways. It's kind of a buzzword. And I don't know if this is really going to help define it, but this is kind of how I think of it. So a logic model is something that's used in evaluation to kind of help organize the evaluation. So if we think about a researcher's career and evaluating their career, we have kind of four areas really. You have the activities that they do in their career, so you have their research, their leadership, education, mentoring, laboratory work that they do, the travel they do, all of that is part of the activities of their career. And then we have kind of the support that they receive, the resources that they have that are part of it. So they have the development training, the research funding they have the laboratories that they work in, the computer systems that are part of kind of their software systems and things that they have that make all their work possible, all that support they receive, the core facilities, that sort of thing, office space. So if we wanted to talk about kind of evaluating the effectiveness of those things and how that's all working when it comes to those, we would use something in the evaluation world that's called process indicators. And that's kind of not so much an area that the library dives into, though they could. I'm not saying that we have to, like, not do that, but let's just keep that in mind, that that's kind of a different area that maybe faculty affairs or the Office of Research are very much motivated to learn about. The other half of that is kind of their career outputs and their career outcomes. And so career outputs would be like the conference papers, the invited lectures, the educational materials, the journal articles, the software applications, the research methodologies, the clinical protocols. Those are all kind of those tangible outputs of their career. And then the outcomes. Maybe they had successful mentees, or they had some kind of new disease treatment they came up with, or development of a medical device, or they just advanced knowledge in their field. Or all these sorts of things. Those are more the outcomes. And when we talk about evaluation, we use impact indicators. So these would be metrics to better understand what the impact has been of these outputs and outcomes. And so when you hear the word impact, it really comes from the evaluation field, and we're talking about these outputs and these outcomes in particular. And I'm going to use indicators and metrics interchangeably today because for our purposes, that's just fine. But it's just indicating that there's been something happening in this area. And so that's where that word impact kind of comes in. So, so when it comes to indicators then, these impact indicators, we can actually find a lot of them. We don't have to reinvent the wheel. They already exist. And they exist in libraries of indicators, and I have 3 that I'm listing here today, and I'll go into briefly. But you might know of more of them, and there are others. So we have the first one that I want to mention. I should say they're also sometimes called evaluation frameworks. And so the first one I want to mention is the 100 metrics to assess and communicate the value of biomedical research. In particular, in this was put out by RAND Europe and the AAMC, and in particular, they cover an area called research impacts, and they actually list a bunch of research impacts. So they say number of journal articles published, and then they provide this really great kind of nice overview of what that is. So you can actually use some of that wording when you're talking about the number of journal articles. So it's the number of peer-reviewed journal articles published over a particular time frame, and it's a quantitative metric of the volume of research produced by an individual or institution. And so this is kind of, there are more, obviously there's 100 of them, but this is just a sampling of those that you can use. And then also there's the Becker Medical Library Model for the assessment of research impact. And they actually kind of put together both outputs and outcomes. So they have a topic area called advancement of knowledge, which to me is an outcome. And then they have listed underneath that outputs that kind of relate to that outcome. And they also have further outcomes that relate to that outcome. So for instance, a book or book chapters is an output. And they're saying, well, you know, a book or book chapter kind of has related to or advanced knowledge because it's been generated by a research study, it's been noted in a bibliography, maybe it's used as a textbook for higher education, or there's been translations of that book, or maybe it's been cited in subsequent publications. These are all ideas that this book has created some kind of advancement of knowledge. Then they have something called change in understanding and awareness. That actually is more of an outcome, but it relies on the advancement of knowledge. And it talks about how the research study findings have represented a paradigm shift in the field, or they've led to a change in understanding for a problem. And so the Becker model is a really great model for kind of understanding different outcomes and how outputs and other outcomes kind of all come together. And so it's a great tool to use. The other one is that I want to mention is a review of characteristics of 108 author-level bibliometric indicators. And if you are sitting there and you're thinking, 108? Are you serious? 108? Yes, there are 108. And I actually read the paper because I couldn't believe it. I thought that was so many. There's no way. But no, there really are. And they do a nice job of going over them and explaining how easy or difficult it is to calculate those metrics. You know, for example, this is kind of the easiest one here, but indicators of publication count. So they're saying the metric is total publications. It's the count of production used in formal communications. First author counting in biomedical literature is where you give credit to the first author only. So these obviously are more of the traditional metrics, but I should mention too, and I'm going to talk about alternative metrics. I think it's my next slide. Yeah. The Becker model and the 100 metrics from the AANC and RAND Corporation, the first one I talked about, they're really chock full of alternative metrics, so metrics that go beyond just the tracking and the citation of these peer-reviewed or these traditional journal articles. But there's also some really great resources if this is an unfamiliar topic or people have talked to you about alt metrics and you're kind of wondering exactly what all that is about. There's some great resources listed here as well. And then, of course, I want to mention the relative citation ratio. It's a new metric by the NIH, and it basically is comparing your particular paper to similar NIH-funded papers and gives you a score based on that. And there's a lot of metrics or a lot of resources you can use to better understand that, but I wanted to mention it because it is a new metric that people do talk about. Okay, so getting back to our scenario. So for instance, we have our scenario was, I'm in early in my career in a narrow research field, how do I describe my impact? So a few things right off the bat that I hear from this. She's early in her career, so she may not have many citations because she maybe hasn't published very often, or maybe she's just recently published and there's not enough time for those articles to gain citations. And so while normalized citation metrics can be helpful, that might not necessarily be the avenue we're going to go down to use citations as a proxy for advancement of knowledge. We're going to talk about that in different ways. She's in a narrow research field. To me, this might just mean that, we can kind of more easily identify the maybe important or more seasoned researchers in her field and determine, just how people are using her work a little bit easier than if she was in a really broad field. And then she talks about describing impact. What I kind of want to know from her and through conversation with her is, does she have any particular metrics she's been asked to provide? Does she have any understanding of what she thinks impact is? And if she doesn't have those or she doesn't know, there's still a lot to work with. It's not like that kind of puts us dead in the water. There's still a lot we can do. So I'm going to run this more as a conversation with her, right? So I'm going to ask her when she comes in to just tell me a little bit about her research, kind of get a feel for how well she can describe it to me, and to talk about what she thinks research impact is. But I'm also going to have some notes to go off of because I'm definitely someone who needs that. And so, for instance, I might say, if we wanted to talk about one of the outcomes of your research as you advancing knowledge, maybe we will look to see how people have cited your work. Maybe we'll look for the citations and other sources, or maybe she can just give me a narrative and we can talk about what advancement of knowledge means in her field. We might also talk about measures of prestige, and so has she been the first author of a publication or given a presentation as a solo presenter? Has she, we might review with her the number of speaker invitations or conference invitations she's received. If she's in a kind of a health-related field, we might talk about health impacts and clinical implementation, looking for citations in those clinical sources or guidelines. We might also talk about research productivity and knowledge production. And because she's early career, we might do that talking about her conference presentations, papers, or posters. Ask her about presentations that she's maybe given to departments or other relevant groups. We might discuss research engagement with her, review her co-authors, and talk to her, what can she tell me about the strengths of her collaborations, the strengths of the networks that she has, and how the people that she's working with really kind of give her an edge on making sure that she can do her research well and have the right people connected to make sure that it goes well. We might actually examine social media attention for interest by researchers or the public, looking for views or downloads as indication of dissemination and interest in her research, because again, you know, she's early in her career, she might not have a lot of citations to work with. And then I'm going to do some very practical things with her. If that, you know, that conversation, depending on how that goes, if we have enough time, I might say, let's actually look at her online footprint. Is she registered for an Orkin ID? What do her online profiles look like? How complete are they or up to date are they? And maybe we'll talk about her biographical statement. How does she present herself or talk about her work? What's at stake here with her research? Am I understanding what's at stake from this and why it's important for her research to move forward? And then we might just kind of delve right into dissemination. And I'm not necessarily going to like get out a piece of paper and write a dissemination plan with her, but I'm going to ask her, what does she hope to achieve in the dissemination of her research? What audiences does she want to make sure that gets a chance to see her work? And what kind of modes of communication, tools, or resources is she interested in using to reach those audiences? We might actually even draft a plain language description of one of her papers and just kind of go through how that would work and make sure that she's familiar with that. And then we might also find examples of online dissemination in her field to really kind of show her how other people in her field are disseminating work. And then, of course, we're going to mention our institutional repository and talk about open access and then other options for sharing if she's not interested in that. And then lastly, because she's early in her career, we might talk about her publishing strategies, if she's talked about that with her mentor, if they have a plan for that. And if they don't, or if she feels like she needs a little more support in that area, we might actually schedule her for a journal selection training and talk to her about the different journal metrics and how she can use, you know, how she might look at various journals for publishing her work. Then last, I'm a person who loves lots of examples, and so I want to make sure that she leaves with some good examples of research impact. And so this is a great website. You might know of others, but this is a group of the UK institutions had to report back in 2014, and they're doing it again, I believe, in coming up, maybe is it 2018, I'm not sure, of the impact of their work back to their government about how the research funding they've had has had impact. And they actually then made all of these case studies publicly available. So you can search these case studies based on subject area or institution, so you can see what Oxford University thinks is impactful. And they actually write these case studies. And so it's a good place to get examples of how you might talk about research impact for particular areas. And then I'm going to encourage her to kind of, you know, not just think about the numbers, you know, I have X number of citations kind of thing, but to really think about this in terms of a narrative or a story, and just kind of think about the changes that her research might make in these various areas, and to talk about that, and just to make sure that I don't focus too much with her on just pure numbers, unless, of course, that's what she needs to report on, and she's been advised that that's what she needs to have. But to really kind of think about maybe going a little bit beyond that. So that is kind of my wrap up there for the consultation that I might have with a researcher. So we've talked today about the metrics and impact core services, the enhancing the impact of your research class, and kind of how you can customize those sorts of things. And we've also talked about the research impact assessment consultation that we have with researchers. And so I think that we've covered a lot of the things that I had mentioned that we would, and hopefully you've gained a better understanding or got some inspiration and ideas on research impact, and in particular dissemination and visibility. And if you have any questions, this is, I think, the time to go over that, but also another kind of display of where the slides are available at if you haven't also gotten them from the South Central region.
Great. Thank you for a wonderful presentation, Karen. Please, if you have questions, go ahead and put them into the chat box. We did have a couple of questions during the presentation, Karen, that I'll tell you about now. The first one is Someone's wondering if you have an example of some of those individual publication summaries that you might be able to share.
That's a good question. So we don't have one publicly available yet. We do actually, for our own purposes, have a template that we fill in. But if it's something that you're very interested in, please email me and I can send you our template so you can take a look at it and see how that might work for you. Again, we use a lot of, we use Scopus and Web of Science in our templates. And so hopefully those are databases you have access to, but again, you can always maybe use Publisher Parish with Google Scholar if you need to find some of those metrics as well. So unfortunately not made widely available yet, but please email me if you'd like a copy.
Well, and on that related question, someone has a question about whether you have a class for CE credit that any of the attendees here today could attend.
No, we don't have a class. I think it's asking maybe if we make any of these classes maybe available on like YouTube so people can go listen to them. Right now we don't record the classes that we do with our faculty, but we have actually been thinking about putting a class together for MLA as a CE prior to the conference, but of course there's lots of caveats with that, if we get accepted kind of thing. Thanks for your interest.
Great. Another question that we had during the presentation is someone was looking to hear more about Google Trends and to explain more about that.
Oh, yeah. No, that's a great question. So Google Trends basically is just showing you what's trending topic-wise on Google and how people like terms. And so you could actually look up terms to see, is this something that people have actually been searching for? Have they actually used this way of phrasing it? And you can see, it'll just show you a nice little graph. You can compare terms. And I think it just gives you a better understanding of how people are thinking about words when they go, especially in Google, to search for something. Like, what are the words that they're using and how are they kind of forming that concept? It's a great website. It's very easy to use. So go ahead and check it out.
Great. Thank you, Karen. Another question is asking, why do you use both Scopus and Web of Science?
That's a great question. So one of the things that we try to do is not to be too focused on one particular data source, and I think we're trying to get to that with symplectic elements. We recognize that there are some metrics in Scopus, such as the field-weighted citation impact, that we're interested in, but also it's kind of a really, I think, neat feature in Essential Science Indicators, which is kind of, you can get it as a plugin. I guess you could use the word plugin. I don't know if that's the official term, in Web of Science, so that you can see hot and highly cited papers in Web of Science. Actually, I think that might be now a feature that they've just, in their kind of new version, made available. So we use that to talk about kind of looking at like how kind of percentile rankings and how papers are being perceived or used or cited by users in the academic community. So, you know, it's really just it's just something we've always done. You don't necessarily have to do that, but we just prefer to use metrics kind of from both. So, but we always mention which database they're coming from so that there's no confusion there as the data source.
Great. Another question, I'm sensing a trend here, is the question about whether you've published anything about your approach. I know you presented at MLA and ALA this year, but do you have anything published about it?
No, and it's mostly, we actually have an article that will hopefully be coming out in the Journal of the Medical Library Association in January. We're working on revising it right now about it's 7 different institutions that have kind of similar services related to research impact, talking about their audience, talking about the tools that they use, interesting projects that they've been involved in, kind of their, whether or not they have a formalized service like we have here at Northwestern, or maybe they have more of an informal service, the number of people that are involved in that and their percentage time that they devote to it. So that paper will be coming out, but it doesn't specifically mention, you know, go into detail about classes and that sort of thing. But certainly it's a great place to kind of get information of seeing who else is doing this kind of work. But again, publishing would be great. I think just that's the timing. Finding the time to do that is a bit of an issue. So as it is for everyone, publish or perish, right?
Absolutely. Well, especially as you're helping so many of the faculty themselves get out there and have their research published.
Yes,
related
exactly.
to that, another question was about the breakdown of those who make use of the different services, students versus junior faculty, basic versus clinical researchers. Can you speak at all to that breakdown?
Yeah, so we actually, for our individuals, the individuals that come in, a lot of times it's junior faculty who are, when it comes to tenure and promotion, who are new to the process, and they are looking for assistance on their tenure and promotion packet, or if it's, I wish I could give you numbers. I don't have them divided out by numbers, but typically when we're working with more senior faculty, it's because they're working with a research group and they're trying to report the impact of maybe their center or their institute, or like, for instance, the Cardia study of a large multi-site study. And so that's kind of more when the group stuff comes into play. But honestly, we work a lot on with more of the senior faculty on they need their CVs updated, and they want, or they need to kind of update a kind of biographical sketch, and they want to include some of those more alternative metrics, or kind of the narrative about the attention around their work. And that's not something they're as familiar with doing, and so they'll come in and we end up drafting things for them and running it by them and seeing what they would like to include or not include. So I guess it's kind of coming from all different areas. Students, it's more, not as much, but we really do, we'll go to like the training grant programs and talk to them about ORCID and the importance of kind of putting your best foot forward online. So we have done that, that class for the training grants. So yes, I guess it's kind of all of them, but I'm sorry I don't have a specific breakdown. But thank you, though, for asking.
All right, great. And it looks like we don't have any more questions, but a suggestion from one of our attendees that there's something called the visual abstracts movement that's being widely adopted in surgical journals and spreading to other domains. And apparently it's also a hashtag on Twitter, hashtag visual abstracts. So that might be something interesting to look into as well.
Great. Thank you very much for that idea. Thanks, Mary.
All right, well, if there are no more questions, I'm going to say thank you very much, Karen, for a fabulous presentation. A reminder to attendees to hang on for just a few more minutes so we can do our final housekeeping, but we want to give a big thanks to Karen. Thank you so much for being here today and for your wonderful presentation.
Thank you.
All right, so I'm going to go ahead and stop the recording now.